Welcome back, my dear friends, fellow lovers of literature, seekers of meaning, and explorers of stories that ask us not just to watch, but to feel and to reflect. If you've wandered here by chance, welcome to this small corner of the internet where films aren't merely entertainment, but become texts, poems, and mirrors held up to our own restless lives. I like to think of this channel, Frame Shift, as a gathering place where we peel back the glossy layers of cinema and find the human heart beating underneath. Before we dive in, let me pause for a brief, humble request. If you find yourself enjoying these conversations, if you feel at home here among stories and analysis, please like this video and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, not for numbers, but because it helps this community of thoughtful watchers grow. The film on our minds today is The Atom Project, 2022, and let me be perfectly honest with you, this isn't going to be a traditional review. I'm not here to hand out stars or ratings or even to convince you to watch it. What I want is something deeper, more resonant. Think of this as a study session with a trusted friend, where we talk about what lies underneath the spectacle, the ideas, the echoes of literature, the ghosts of memory that a story like this stirs up. It's more of a meditation, really, because when I watch a film like this, I don't just see actors and plot twists, I see a dialogue with my own past, and perhaps with yours as well. When I first encountered this movie, I didn't expect it to stir me the way it did. On the surface, it wears the trappings of science fiction adventure, time travel, high-tech chases, witty banter, but beneath those bright colors lies something surprisingly intimate. A meditation on memory, on grief, and on the strange, often tender distance between who we once were and who we become. I think all of us, in quieter moments, have wanted to step back into our past, to confront the child we once were. Haven't you ever wondered what that child would think of you now? Would they be proud? Would they laugh? Would they be disappointed? That haunting question threads through the film's heart, and it's impossible not to feel it linger after the credits roll. There's a peculiar magic in stories that invite us to meet ourselves. Literature has always known this trick, whether it's Dante guided through hell, or Wordsworth looking back on his boyhood rambles, or Proust chasing a memory through the taste of a Madeleine. Time collapses, self meets self, and we, the audience, find ourselves caught between the then and the now. Watching this film, I found myself remembering the quiet bedroom I had as a child, wallpaper peeling slightly at the corners, the hum of a ceiling fan marking the rhythm of summer evenings. I thought of that younger version of me, book in hand, wondering what adulthood would be like, and for a fleeting moment, it was as though I was sitting beside that child again, trying to explain what life has become. This to me is where cinema is at its best, not when it dazzles us with effects, but when it brushes against our own hidden memories. The narrative itself is deceptively simple to recount, though it contains enough surprises to keep even the most attentive viewer leaning forward. At its core, the story follows a man from the future who stumbles back into the wrong year, colliding quite literally with his younger self. That premise alone, meeting yourself in childhood, feels like a thought experiment born out of a philosophy seminar rather than a Hollywood writer's room. Because think about it, if you had to sit across the table from your 12-year-old self, what would you say? Would you confess your regrets? Would you offer advice? Or would you be too ashamed, too tongue-tied to speak at all? What makes the film captivating isn't simply the mechanics of time travel. It's the emotional knots that tangle when past and present versions of a person occupy the same room. The older self is weary, sharp-tongued, armored with humor that conceals wounds. The younger self is brash, insecure, raw in ways only a child can be. Together, they mirror the contradictions inside all of us. One carries the innocence we've lost, the other bears the scars we've earned. To see them side by side is to witness the dialogue of identity itself, but let me not spoil too much just yet. The plot moves with the rhythm of a chase and a reconciliation. There are forces at play: villains, powerful corporations, technological dangers, all the narrative devices you'd expect from a modern science fiction spectacle. And yet, what I remember most aren't the explosions or the futuristic drones, but the quieter beats, the awkward tenderness between the boy and the man, the strained silences with a grieving mother, the way the film dares to ask if healing can travel backwards as well as forwards. These are the real twists, not the reveal of a time travel paradox, but the realization that even in a story about the future, the most pressing concern is the past. There's a moment, I won't spell it out in detail, that left me unexpectedly raw. It involves a reunion, fleeting and bittersweet, the kind that leaves you breathless because you know such reunions are impossible in real life. And yet the film lets us taste it, just for a second. I found myself thinking of those I've lost, of the conversations I'll never get to have again. Isn't that, after all, the secret wish tucked inside every time travel story? The desire to go back, not to change history on a grand scale, but simply to hold a hand once more, to hear a familiar laugh, to say the words we never said. It's a deeply human yearning, one literature has wrestled with for centuries, from Orpheus descending into the underworld for Eurydice, to the countless letters and diaries written to loved ones already gone. This film, beneath its slick exterior, taps into that same well of longing. As I watched, I found myself reflecting on the way we carry grief through time. We like to think of grief as something that fades, something we get over, but more often it becomes a companion. It shapes the way we love, the way we guard ourselves, the way we speak to the people closest to us. And when we see characters confronting both their younger selves and their lost parents, we are really seeing the impossible attempt to reconcile with grief itself. The film isn't perfect, it doesn't always linger as long as I might wish, and sometimes the jokes come too quickly, but there's sincerity in its attempt to wrap science fiction around the aching heart of a family drama. And that sincerity, I think, is what makes it linger. Another thread I can't help but notice, especially as someone steeped in literature, is the motif of doubling. In novels, doubling often reveals hidden truths, the shadow self, the twin, the mirror that refuses to flatter. Here the doubling is literal, the man meets himself, but the real doubling is thematic. The boy mirrors the man, and in watching them clash and comfort one another, we see our own fractured selves reflected. It's a narrative strategy that resonates beyond film. It's the same impulse that drives us to reread old journals, to return to childhood neighborhoods, to imagine conversations across time. The self is never singular, and this film understands that in a way that feels quietly profound. And of course, no film is without its spectacle. There are sequences that dazzle, the whir of futuristic weapons, the tension of a chase across night landscapes, the glow of technology that feels both alien and strangely familiar. These elements keep the story moving, give it texture and thrill. But I find myself less invested in the mechanics of how the future works and more intrigued by the emotional mechanics of how memory works. The science here is a backdrop. The real subject is the way time shapes us, bends us, and sometimes, if we are lucky, offers us the chance to forgive ourselves. In teasing the major twists without giving them away, I'll say this. The story builds toward a confrontation that is both external and internal. On the outside, it's a battle against forces that would misuse technology for power. On the inside, it's a battle between regret and acceptance, between clinging to wounds and choosing to let go. When those two battles intersect, the film reaches its crescendo. What I love is that even at its loudest, even in its climactic spectacle, there remains a thread of tenderness, an insistence that no matter how wild the science fiction becomes, it is anchored in the most ordinary, fragile human truths. When the credits finally rolled, I sat quietly for a while, not because I was stunned by the action, but because I was thinking about myself, about the child I was, the adult I've become, and the ways I still hope to reconcile the two. That, I believe, is the measure of a film's success, not whether it entertains us for 2 hours, but whether it stays with us, haunting the edges of our own reflections, and this one did. It asked me gently but firmly to remember the boy I once was, and to ask him for forgiveness. So my friends, as we prepare to dive deeper in the coming minutes into its literary echoes, its motifs, and its symbolic gestures, I invite you to think not just about what happened on screen, but about what happens inside you when you watch. Because this isn't really a movie review, it's an intellectual and emotional exercise, a critical analysis meant for those of us who see film as literature, as text, as something that teaches as much as it entertains. Together, we'll sift through its layers and see what truths emerge. And before I carry us further into that analysis, let me leave you with one thought, one question to hold. If you could sit with your younger self for an evening, what would you say? Would you tell them about the heartbreaks ahead? Would you shield them from the mistakes, or would you let them stumble, knowing that stumble is the only way forward? The beauty of stories like this one is that they don't answer for us, they simply pose the question, and perhaps that's all a film or a piece of literature needs to do, to make us pause and to wonder. The story begins with a mood that feels both familiar and tinged with anticipation, like stepping into a memory you half remember yet know is about to reveal something entirely new. It doesn't unfold with the cold detachment of exposition. Instead, it throws us directly into the hum of an ordinary life, the kind of life whose everyday details suddenly shimmer with significance once you realize what's at stake. What strikes me at the very outset is the way the film sets the stage, not with distant grandeur, but with something intimate, an opening that feels close to the ground, personal, anchored in the vulnerability of a boy trying to navigate his place in the world. There is loneliness in the air, the kind of loneliness you don't recognize as a child because you assume it's normal, until adulthood teaches you how heavy such silences actually were. We meet the boy at a point in his life where his world feels unstable. He is young, bruised by grief, and slightly awkward in the way he handles himself among his peers. There's a fragility in him, a sharpness in his words that acts more as defense than cruelty, and I found myself aching with recognition. Who hasn't at some point in their childhood used sarcasm as a shield, turning words into little weapons because actual strength felt so far away? His home carries the faint echo of absence, a father gone too soon, a mother stretched thin trying to hold the seams of their world together. The boy resents it, though beneath the resentment is a desperate craving for connection. This is where the story quietly plants its first seed, the yearning for lost family, the longing for someone who might understand, and then the extraordinary begins. Out of the stillness of this suburban backdrop comes a rupture, a noise in the sky, the strange arrival of something utterly out of place. It is science fiction's gift to take the everyday and crack it open, to slip wonder into the cracks of grief. The boy, skeptical yet instinctively curious, stumbles into the impossible. What he finds is not a monster, not an alien, but a man who looks worn down by life, sharp-tongued, yet oddly familiar. Their first interaction crackles with the kind of disbelief that makes you laugh even as it tugs at your sense of wonder. This isn't just any stranger, this is him. Older, heavier with years, carrying burdens and knowledge that the boy cannot yet comprehend. There's a kind of genius in the way their meeting plays out, because it refuses to be sentimental at first. Instead, it's messy, awkward, even combative. The older man, battered but skilled, treats the younger version of himself not with gentle patience, but with a kind of rough, irritated humor. And the boy, naturally, refuses to believe, fights back, pokes and prods at this claim. Watching them bicker feels almost uncomfortably honest, like watching a recording of your own arguments with yourself. The man sees in the boy the insecurities he has tried so hard to bury, while the boy sees in the man a future he isn't sure he wants. Key events begin layering themselves quickly here. The older man is on the run, injured, his futuristic ship damaged, hunted by forces that want something from him. He has landed here by accident, forced into this collision with his own childhood because his original destination slipped through his fingers. There's something profoundly moving in that accident, time itself, messy and imperfect, guiding him not to where he planned to go, but to where he needed to be. Isn't that so often the truth of our own lives? We think we are stumbling, failing, when in fact we are arriving exactly where we're meant to confront ourselves. The boy, though overwhelmed, becomes an unwilling ally. He patches wounds, sneaks food, offers begrudging help, all while brimming with questions. The man deflects as much as he answers, but through their exchanges, we begin to piece together the wider conflict. A future corrupted by greed, technology stolen and twisted, a personal mission that is as much about saving the world as it is about saving something lost within himself. Every revelation carries dual weight, global stakes and personal ones. As they move through their uneasy alliance, what deepens the story are the quieter domestic scenes. The man, hidden in his younger self's home, has to interact with the boy's mother, his mother. These moments carry a tenderness I wasn't expecting. She doesn't recognize him, of course, but he recognizes her, every line in her face, every nuance in her voice. To watch him speak to her, carrying the knowledge of her eventual loss, is to watch grief in reverse. He knows the heartbreak that lies ahead, the moments she will not live to see, and in his clumsy way he tries to offer her comfort without revealing why. The boy, for his part, remains oblivious to the depth of what's happening, but we, as viewers, see the aching layer of recognition. This is where the story truly begins to blur the boundaries of time, not through special effects, but through emotion. As the plot moves forward, the boy and the man are forced into moments of shared action. The older version brings with him the technology of his era, weapons that hum with alien energy, ships that gleam with impossible speed, drones that stalk them through forests and skies. These sequences provide momentum, the spectacle that keeps our eyes wide, but beneath them is the unfolding of a relationship. At first, the boy resists, mocking his older self, rolling his eyes at what feels like absurdity. But little by little, in the heat of danger, trust begins to spark. It's a reluctant trust, prickly and imperfect, but real. One of the most pivotal early developments comes when the boy begins to see that this man, though older and more capable, is not invincible. He watches him bleed, falter, groan with pain. He sees that adulthood does not mean freedom from fear or flaw, it simply means carrying those flaws differently. This realization shifts something. The boy starts to understand that the future version of himself is not some distant god, but a continuation of the same fragile, awkward kid he already is. That recognition is both terrifying and oddly comforting. Meanwhile, the man sees in the boy all the pieces of himself he has buried, the vulnerability, the quick wit, the stubborn refusal to let anyone close. Their arguments become mirrors, each insult, each jab, a way of wrestling with their own self-loathing. And yet in those arguments there are moments of breakthrough, a joke shared at the same time, a smile that slips through before either can stop it. These are the kernels of reconciliation, though neither of them knows it yet. The narrative steadily widens its scope. We learn more about the forces pursuing the man, about the dangers posed by the technology he's trying to stop. The villains are drawn with sleek menace, their motives rooted not in cartoonish evil, but in the age-old hunger for control. They represent, in some ways, the externalization of the man's internal battles, the misuse of time, the distortion of memory, the desire to control what should never be controlled. Every time they appear, the boy is thrown into a new layer of fear, forced to reckon with a world far larger and more dangerous than he ever imagined. And yet, amid the chases and confrontations, the heart of the story remains lodged in the small human exchanges. There's a dinner table scene where the man, cloaked in secrecy, shares words with his mother that land with the weight of unspoken confession. There's a schoolyard encounter where the boy, emboldened by his strange new ally, begins to stand a little taller against bullies. These are the threads that stitch the spectacle back to the soul. They remind us that no matter how dazzling the effects, what matters most are the choices we make in the ordinary spaces of our lives. Gradually, the boy begins to suspect the truth of who this man really is. The hints are everywhere in the way he speaks, the jokes that sound too familiar, the memories he lets slip. When the realization finally lands, it isn't with a triumphant swell of music, but with a quiet, almost painful clarity. Imagine looking into the eyes of someone older, weathered, and realizing those are your own eyes, just aged by time. It's disorienting, humbling, even frightening, but it also brings a strange kind of hope. If this is who I become, maybe there's still a chance to shape him. The man, for his part, resists too much sentimentality. He doesn't want to linger in explanations or tender heart-to-hearts. Part of this is practicality. Time is short, danger is near, but part of it is emotional self-preservation. To spend too long looking at his younger self is to confront the innocence he lost, the paths he regrets. And yet, no matter how he tries to keep the boy at arm's length, the bond grows. Shared danger has a way of forging connection, and soon they are moving as a team, if an uneven one. As the first half of the narrative unfolds, the stakes tighten. They are pursued relentlessly, forced into hiding, driven to the edge of what they can manage. The boy finds himself wielding weapons he barely understands, his small hands trembling yet determined. The man, though battered, continues to fight, driven by a mission that he hasn't fully revealed. And beneath it all lies the beating heart of the story, the fragile, painful, beautiful connection between who we were and who we become. By the time the midpoint approaches, we are no longer simply watching a science fiction adventure. We are caught in something much richer, a meditation on identity, on grief, and on the possibility of reconciliation. The boy has changed already. He stands taller, speaks with a little more conviction. The man, too, has softened in subtle ways, his defenses cracking under the persistence of his younger self's questions. They are still far from understanding each other fully, but the journey has begun. It's difficult to describe the texture of these early chapters without leaning too heavily on plot alone, because what makes them resonate isn't just what happens, but how it feels. It feels like watching your own reflection shift, like recognizing the child in your adult face or the adult in a childhood photo. It's uncomfortable, moving, and strangely cathartic. By the time the first half has carried us through its revelations, dangers, and tentative bonds, we know one thing for certain. This isn't just a story about saving the future. It's a story about learning to live with the past, and perhaps to forgive it. And as the threads of family, loss, and time weave tighter, we sense that the journey ahead will only demand more from them, more trust, more courage, and perhaps the greatest challenge of all, the willingness to confront the truth they've both been avoiding. It is here, suspended between the immediacy of danger and the intimacy of reconciliation, that the story holds us, urging us onward into what lies ahead. The story presses forward with a sense of urgency, the kind of momentum that refuses to allow either the characters or the audience to catch their breath for too long. The ground has already been laid, the relationships carefully seeded, and now everything begins to tighten. What once felt like accidental collisions of past and future now feels like an inexorable pull toward confrontation, toward truths that cannot be avoided any longer. The boy and the man, no longer strangers, have started to move with a rhythm that suggests something like trust, but that trust remains uneasy, shaped as much by necessity as by choice. It is in this stage of the narrative that the weight of secrets comes into play. The boy continues to ask questions about what happens, about what he becomes, about the mission that has hurled this older version of himself into his life. The man dodges as often as he answers, his silences as telling as his words. We begin to realize that the mission is larger than just repairing a damaged ship or escaping enemies. The stakes are existential, not just for their family, but for the trajectory of the world itself. The man carries a knowledge of what time has become, what dangers have bloomed from inventions once believed to be miraculous. And here lies one of the story's most piercing truths. Progress, unchecked and unexamined, can easily curdle into power, into domination, into destruction. The antagonists close in, relentless. Their faces are cold, their resources vast, their motives disturbingly familiar in the annals of history, greed disguised as vision, control masquerading as order. Their pursuit forces the pair into flight, into hiding, into the kind of improvisation that tests both courage and loyalty. Alongside the crackle of futuristic battles and the sweep of spectacle, there is always that quieter undercurrent, the way the boy watches his older self, searching for some reflection of who he is destined to be. The way the man, despite himself, softens in those glances, seeing in the boy a version of himself not yet hardened by time's blows. And then, in one of those turning points that feels both inevitable and shattering, the man reveals more. The mission is not simply about survival, but about undoing something catastrophic. Time itself has been distorted, bent to serve power rather than possibility. A woman formidable, cunning, ruthless, has seized control of the very mechanisms of time travel, reshaping history to secure her dominance. The ripple effects of her choices have carved into every life, including theirs. And so, the man's journey backward is not merely an escape, it is a rebellion, a desperate attempt to restore what was lost. The boy, hearing this, finds himself caught between awe and despair. The idea that the future could be so compromised, so corrupted, fills him with dread, but even more overwhelming is the personal revelation. Their father was at the center of it all. The man they both lost, the absence that defined their family, had been instrumental in creating the technology that became weaponized. Suddenly, grief becomes more complex, layered with guilt, with anger, with the ache of unfinished conversations. It is here that the narrative pivots into its most profound territory, not simply the saving of the world, but the reckoning with family, with inheritance, with the legacies we never chose yet must still bear. Together, boy and man set out toward the place where all these threads converge. Along the way, the boy grows in ways that feel subtle yet undeniable. He is no longer just the sarcastic, wounded child we first met. Exposure to danger, to truth, to the fragile humanity of his older self has etched into him a quiet resilience. He walks taller now, speaks with more weight, and in moments of fear, he no longer collapses inward but steadies himself. It is as though the man's presence has catalyzed an accelerated coming of age, and for the man, the journey is equally transformative. He begins to laugh again, small, genuine bursts that surprise him as much as the boy. He lets down his guard in flickers, allowing himself to care openly rather than hiding behind sardonic quips. Their relationship, once fraught with suspicion, now carries the unmistakable bond of recognition. They are, after all, the same soul, fractured by time but still whole in essence. The antagonists, of course, are not idle. They push harder, their tactics crueler, their pursuit more desperate as the possibility of losing control grows nearer. This culminates in confrontations that hum with tension, sequences where technology blazes and landscapes are scarred by the clash of wills. Yet even amid the spectacle, the heart of the story beats strongest in its emotional confrontations. When the boy witnesses firsthand the cruelty of those who would bend time for power, he does not just tremble with fear, he bristles with indignation. And when the man faces his enemies, it is not merely as a soldier of the future, but as a son, as a human being trying to right what went wrong. The narrative drives us toward its central crucible, a meeting with their father. This moment arrives not as a neat resolution, but as a staggering convergence of grief, memory, and longing. Imagine for a moment what it would be to stand in front of someone you have lost, someone whose absence has shaped your entire life, and to find them alive, breathing, unaware of what you already know. The boy experiences this with raw immediacy, wide-eyed and trembling. The man experiences it with the weight of years, eyes brimming with all the words he never thought he'd get to say. Their father in this encounter becomes more than a character. He is a symbol of love, of loss, of the imperfect humanity that nonetheless forms the foundation of their lives. He listens, he speaks, he tries to understand the strange reality of these two versions of his son standing before him. The conversations that unfold here are among the most poignant of the story. The father imparts wisdom, yes, but more importantly, he imparts presence, the kind of presence that grief had stolen from them. In these exchanges, the film dares to imagine a healing impossible in real life. the ability to tell the dead what they meant, to receive their love one last time. Of course, this reunion cannot last. The world presses in, the antagonists poised to strike, the machinery of time threatening to collapse. What follows is a climax that balances both spectacle and intimacy. On one level there are the battles, ships crashing, weapons firing, technology sparking in dazzling cascades. But on another level there is the emotional climax, father and sons, across time, standing together. It is a scene heavy with symbolism, the past, the present, and the future bound in one fragile moment of unity. The resolution is not clean. Time, by its very nature, resists neatness. Choices must be made, sacrifices accepted. The man knows that he cannot stay, that the paradox of his presence cannot endure. The boy knows, too, that this fleeting union with his father cannot last forever. The heartbreak lies not in the inevitability of separation, but in the grace with which they face it. They hold onto the memory, onto the words exchanged, knowing that even as time pulls them apart, the bond will remain indelible. And so the story winds toward its end. The antagonists are defeated, their schemes undone, not just by brute force but by the resilience of family, of love, of forgiveness. The father, the boy, and the man share one final moment, a farewell that feels like a prayer. Then, like all farewells, it slips into silence. The timelines correct themselves, the distortions healed. The boy is left with the echo of an experience that will shape him forever, even if no one else believes it. The man is sent back to the path of his life, changed in ways too profound to measure. When the dust settles, what remains is not the spectacle of time travel or the intricacies of paradox. What remains is the image of a child and his older self finding one another, recognizing one another, forgiving one another. It is the image of a family, fractured by loss yet momentarily whole again, and it is the lingering truth that no matter how far we travel, through time, through grief, through the labyrinth of our own mistakes, we are always seeking the same thing. To belong, to be understood, to be loved. The final moments carry a quietness, a return to the ordinary. The boy resumes his life, schoolyards and suburban streets unchanged, yet everything is different. He carries himself differently now, not because he knows the future in detail, but because he knows something deeper, that he is not alone, that he is capable of growing into someone stronger, kinder, more whole than he imagined. The man, wherever he is carried next, carries the same truth. Their paths have diverged, but the reconciliation between them remains etched into the fabric of time. As the story concludes, we as viewers are left not with the thrill of spectacle, but with the ache of recognition. We are reminded that time, for all its mysteries, cannot give us back what is lost, and yet through stories we can glimpse it again. We can imagine reunions, forgiveness, conversations that reality has denied us. And perhaps that is the secret power of cinema, not to defy time, but to help us live with it, to help us find meaning in the spaces between loss and love. The story closes like a circle, not perfect but whole. We leave it carrying the weight of its questions, the tenderness of its answers, and the lingering desire to look back at our own younger selves, not with regret, but with compassion. And maybe, just maybe, to extend that compassion forward, to the people we are still becoming. There is always something intoxicating about peeling back the glossy surface of a film and finding the odd little fingerprints left behind by its making. For me, the pleasure lies not only in watching the finished story, but in imagining the chaos, the accidents, the peculiarities, and the unexpected choices that happened when cameras weren't rolling, or perhaps when they were, but in ways that no audience member was supposed to notice. Every movie carries its own secret history, and sometimes those secrets are as delightful, as moving, or as strange as the story itself. With this film, the narrative on screen is about time, memory, and family, but behind the scenes there is a parallel story, a weaving together of quirks, risks, and serendipities that make its creation almost as compelling as the story it tells. One of the strangest facts about the film lies in its origin story, which, in a way, mirrors the movie's own fascination with time. This was not a script conceived in the shiny boardrooms of studios just a year or two before cameras rolled. No, its history stretches back almost a decade, gathering dust on shelves, being rewritten, forgotten, rediscovered. There were long years when the project seemed doomed, abandoned by studios that didn't know what to do with a story that mixed time travel with something as tender as grief. The fact that it eventually found its way into production is itself remarkable, like a script that refused to die, waiting for the right combination of actors, directors, and cultural moment to bring it to life. And in that delay there is a strange symmetry. A story about revisiting the past needed time itself to ripen before it could be told. During the long years of limbo, there were other actors attached to play the lead, and some of those names feel almost absurd in hindsight. The idea that someone else might have stood in the shoes we now so strongly associate with the finished film feels like peeking into an alternate timeline. Imagine how differently the emotional beats would have landed with a different performer's cadence, a different face carrying the weight of memory. It's one of those pieces of trivia that reminds us how precarious storytelling really is. It could so easily have been another movie entirely. When the production finally did move forward, one of the most unusual challenges involved balancing tone. This wasn't simply a science fiction adventure. It was part family drama, part comedy, part philosophical thought experiment. On set, that meant scenes often swung wildly from heartache to banter within a matter of minutes. Crew members have spoken about how surreal it was to shoot a deeply emotional confrontation one day, and then pivot the next morning to orchestrating a high-tech chase sequence with drones and green screens. It was as if they were making two films at once, one that required stunt rigs and pyrotechnics, and another that required quiet close-ups of trembling hands and moist eyes. Holding those extremes together was itself one of the film's strangest balancing acts. Perhaps the most endearing bit of behind-the-scenes trivia involves the young actor playing the boy. Cast from an open call, he had never carried a film before, and yet he had the unenviable task of not only holding his own opposite established stars, but also of convincing the audience that he really was the younger version of the man standing beside him. What's unusual is that his preparation didn't involve the usual rehearsals of lines or endless screen tests. Instead, he spent weeks simply watching the lead actor's previous films, memorizing his rhythms, his delivery, even his posture. He mimicked his sarcasm, his pacing, the way he tilted his head. By the time filming began, the boy had become such an uncanny echo of his older counterpart that even the crew joked about déjà vu on set. There is something almost eerie about that, the performance itself becoming a miniature time travel experiment. Another fascinating oddity concerns one of the most tender scenes in the film. The conversation between the older version of the protagonist and his mother. That moment, suffused with quiet grief and warmth, was reportedly filmed in almost total silence on set. Not silence in the sense of microphones turned off, but silence in the sense that the crew, usually bustling with movement, froze in place. Lighting technicians, boom operators, even camera assistants stood as still as statues, unwilling to risk breaking the fragile energy of the performance. It was said that when the director finally called cut, there was a hush in the room, followed not by applause but by something closer to reverence. For a brief moment, cast and crew alike seemed to understand they had captured lightning in a bottle. Strange weather events also marked the shoot, almost as if nature itself wanted to intrude on the story of time and disruption. One location, chosen for its serene forested backdrop, was struck by a sudden storm midway through filming. Trees cracked, rain fell in sheets, and the production was forced to shut down for the day. Yet when they reviewed the footage later, the crew discovered that the storm's first gusts had been captured on film, and the sight of leaves spiraling violently, sky darkening behind the actors, looked so uncanny that the director decided to incorporate some of it. What had been a costly interruption became an unplanned layer of atmosphere, blurring the line between the story's fiction and nature's own drama. Then, there's the oddity of a weapon that became almost a character in itself. A futuristic staff wielded in combat scenes. The design went through countless iterations, from overly bulky prototypes to sleek, impossibly fragile props that broke in rehearsals. At one point, the special effects team accidentally shipped the wrong version to set, a staff designed only for static close-ups, not for action. In the middle of a fight sequence, the lead actor swung it against a stunt double's armor, and the entire thing snapped in half, scattering shards across the floor. Rather than scrap the take, the actor improvised, turning the break into part of the choreography, and the director loved the rawness so much that elements of that improvisation informed the final cut. The weapon, meant to embody futuristic precision, became memorable partly because of its imperfections. Even stranger was the issue of sound. Futuristic gadgets, ships, and weapons all require unique soundscapes, but during production, many of the effects had not yet been designed. This meant that actors were often reacting to silence, pretending to hear hums, buzzes, or explosions that didn't exist. On set, it looked faintly ridiculous, grown adults flinching at imaginary noises, ducking under invisible blasts. Crew members often struggled to keep straight faces, and yet, when post-production layered in the intricate sound design, the performances suddenly looked seamless. It is strange to realize that the awe we feel as viewers is born from a game of elaborate make-believe on set. Another peculiar detail, in some of the more intense action sequences, the actors were strapped into harnesses suspended from cranes to simulate the weightlessness or impact of futuristic combat. During one rehearsal, the rig malfunctioned, spinning the lead actor upside down in a way that looked comical rather than heroic. Rather than frustration, the actor burst out laughing, and the boy on set laughed even harder, teasing him mercilessly for looking like a tangled marionette. The crew later joked that the film's most authentic moment of bonding came not from scripted lines, but from shared laughter at a dangling accident. Trivia also lurks in the smallest details, objects on screen that carry secret histories. The battered jacket worn by the older protagonist, for example, was not crafted fresh by wardrobe. It was sourced from a vintage store, selected for its worn leather and subtle scarring. What no one anticipated was that inside one of the pockets was a folded receipt from decades earlier, yellowed with age. The crew decided to leave it there, treating it as a talisman. The actor carried it throughout filming, and though the audience never sees it, he has said it helped him feel grounded, as though the jacket itself had lived a life before the cameras found it. Then there's the strangeness of time itself on set. Because the film was shot during an unusual global moment, with restrictions and delays reshaping schedules, production stretched longer than expected. Some sequences were filmed months apart, yet in the final cut they flow seamlessly, as though time itself had been smoothed over. For the cast and crew, however, the dissonance was palpable. One day a tearful goodbye, and then, after months away, the very next day on screen, a cheerful reunion. That peculiar bending of time behind the camera mirrored the bending of time within the story, giving everyone involved a strange sense of déjà vu. Perhaps one of the most surreal facts is how deeply personal some of the performances became. The lead actor has spoken about how the story of grief and reconciliation mirrored his own experiences with loss. There were moments during filming when emotion overwhelmed him, not because of the script, but because of memories it stirred. In one particularly difficult scene, he asked the director for a moment alone. Cameras paused, the set stilled, and he returned only when he felt steady enough to continue. That vulnerability, so raw, seeped into the performance, giving it an authenticity that cannot be faked. The boy, too, brought his own strangeness. Between takes, he would pepper the crew with endless questions about time travel, physics, and paradoxes. His curiosity was relentless, often delaying breaks because he refused to let go of a thought experiment. At one point, he even tried to design his own, improved version of the ship using cardboard and tape, proudly displaying it to the crew. Though it never appeared on screen, that cardboard model became a mascot of sorts, a reminder of the childlike wonder that underpinned the entire project. Unusual improvisations also shaped key scenes. The film is laced with witty banter, but not all of it was scripted. Some of the sharpest exchanges between the boy and the man were born from spontaneous ad-libbing. The director encouraged them to tease each other, to push beyond the lines on the page. What resulted were moments that felt startlingly genuine, as though the younger and older selves really were locked in a sibling-like rivalry. The authenticity of that rhythm, awkward pauses, overlapping dialogue, came from the strangeness of letting go of control. Even the villain carried a bit of behind-the-scenes peculiarity. The actress playing her had to portray two versions of her character, one in the present, one in the future. To achieve this, the production employed a combination of digital de-aging and body doubles. During filming, this meant that in some scenes she was literally acting opposite herself, delivering lines to a stand-in who would later be erased. The oddness of talking to one's double created an eerie energy on set, which the director leaned into. When the final product shows her confronting her younger self, the unease we feel is not only scripted, it's rooted in the real strangeness of the performance. Perhaps the strangest fact of all is how close the production came to collapse at several points. Funding wavered, scheduling conflicts threatened, and at one stage it seemed the entire project might be shelved once again. And yet, through a combination of determination, chance, and perhaps sheer stubbornness, the film endured. The irony is delicious. A story about characters fighting against time nearly lost its own battle with time. That persistence, that refusal to vanish, is itself part of the film's DNA. Looking back at these oddities, the storms, the improvised lines, the jacket's hidden receipt, the cardboard spaceship, the laughter from harness mishaps, I realize that they are not just trivia. They are extensions of the story itself. A movie about memory, loss, and the unpredictability of life was created through accidents, coincidences, and unexpected turns. The strangeness behind the camera mirrors the strangeness within the narrative. Both remind us that life, like storytelling, is never neat. It is messy, it is absurd, it is full of moments that break, spill, and then somehow fall back into place in ways more beautiful than if they had been planned. And perhaps that is why I find these behind-the-scenes facts so fascinating. They remind me that films are not conjured whole from imagination. They are built out of broken props, forgotten receipts, laughter at mistakes, storms that interrupt, children who won't stop asking questions. They are as human as the stories they tell, and in that humanity, in all its strangeness, lies their real magic. The story of this film does not live only within its plot. The more I think about it, the more I realize that its significance lies not in the mechanics of time travel, or even in the bravado of its action sequences, but in the way specific events throughout its narrative open doors into larger questions about grief, identity, and the ways we reconcile with ourselves. To examine the film critically is to walk through these events like one moves through a gallery of carefully chosen paintings, each scene revealing not only what happens but also what it means, what it awakens, and why it lingers. The events are staged, yes, crafted with cameras and scripts and special effects, but their resonance is deeply human. They ripple outward, connecting with our own lives in ways both subtle and startling. One of the earliest significant events worth analyzing is the meeting of the boy and the man, two versions of the same person colliding in a moment of chaos. On the surface, it is played with humor and disbelief. The boy's wide-eyed shock, the man's irritated dismissal, the absurdity of their arguments. But viewed critically, this scene functions as more than a gimmick. It is an externalization of the psychological process we all undergo when confronting our younger selves. In literature, doubling often serves as a mirror for self-confrontation. Think of Dostoevsky's The Double or Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Here, the cinematic double is literal, but the effect is the same. It forces the audience to ask, who would I be if I had to sit across from the child I once was? This event marks the beginning of the film's central thematic current, self-reconciliation. It is not about paradoxes of physics, but paradoxes of identity. The boy's immediate reaction, to resist, to mock, to question, echoes the way memory itself works. We often resist looking back honestly. We prefer to see our childhood selves as simpler, more innocent, without the sharp edges of grief. But the boy carries grief, and when he faces the man, it is as though that grief speaks to itself across time. The man's impatience reflects adulthood's tendency to dismiss childhood pain as melodrama, forgetting that the child never had the tools to process loss. This first meeting is a miniature of the entire narrative, the need to take that child seriously, to acknowledge that the pain he feels is real. From a critical perspective, it is a profound reminder of the psychological truth that healing requires us to return to the younger versions of ourselves and treat them with compassion. Another event that deserves careful attention is the dinner scene with the mother. At first glance, it seems simple, just a conversation at a kitchen table. Yet this is perhaps one of the most emotionally resonant events in the film, precisely because of its simplicity. The man, knowing what the boy does not, speaks to his mother with a tenderness disguised under casual banter. He tells her she is doing better than she thinks, that her love is enough, that she is stronger than she realizes. She hears it as kind words from a stranger. He knows it as a son's final chance to say what he never said in life. Critically, this event highlights the film's deeper preoccupation with unspoken love. So much of family life is lived in half-said things, gratitude never voiced, forgiveness never requested, love assumed but rarely articulated. This scene dramatizes that silence. It becomes a kind of wish fulfillment, the fantasy of telling the people we've lost exactly how much they mattered before it is too late. From a thematic standpoint, this event resonates with a universal ache, the desire for closure. That closure may be impossible in life, but cinema grants it for a fleeting moment, and in doing so it gives us both catharsis and sorrow. The storm of action that follows, the pursuit by drones, the clash with antagonists, the chases through forests, is thrilling, yes, but what makes these events critical to the film's impact is not merely their choreography. Rather, it is the way they force the boy and the man into alliance. In literary criticism, moments of crisis often serve as crucibles, revealing character through action. Here, under fire, the boy begins to see the man not as an imposter, but as someone fallible, bruised, still human. The man, in turn, begins to recognize the boy's courage, small though it may be, as something worth protecting. These sequences matter not because of spectacle alone, but because they function as bonding rituals, forging trust through shared danger. One particularly fascinating event occurs when the boy realizes the man is not invincible. Watching him falter, bleed, and grimace in pain is a revelation. This moment functions critically as a dismantling of childhood illusions about adulthood. Children imagine that growing older means becoming untouchable, confident, unafraid. But adulthood, as the film so carefully shows, is simply fear carried differently. By breaking the illusion of invincibility, the event underscores the film's theme of vulnerability. It teaches both the boy and the audience that strength is not the absence of fear, but the endurance of it. The revelation of the father's role in the larger narrative marks another crucial event. When the man explains that their father was responsible for the invention that later corrupted time itself, the story pivots into the territory of generational inheritance. This event critically reframes grief. The father is no longer only the figure they lost, but also the source of a legacy that shaped both their pain and their potential. In psychoanalytic criticism, this echoes the Oedipal struggle, not in its literal form, but in the sense of children grappling with the power and failings of the father figure. The father becomes both origin and obstacle, loved and resented, the absent presence that defines their lives. Meeting the father later in the narrative deepens this complexity. The event is staged with a sense of awe, both characters confronting him with different energies, the boy with innocence and awe, the man with restraint and grief. What strikes me critically about this event is that it collapses time into intimacy. The father who in their lives was memory and loss becomes present tense, and yet his presence does not erase their grief. Instead, it reframes it, showing them that love exists alongside imperfection. The father is brilliant, yes, but also flawed. He is not the god they remembered, nor the villain responsible for all their pain. He is simply a man who tried, who erred, who loved. This event resonates thematically with the concept of acceptance. The characters cannot change what happened, they cannot prevent his death, cannot rewrite history, but they can shift their perspective. In literature, this is akin to the tragic recognition in classical drama, the moment when characters see clearly, not to alter fate, but to embrace it with wisdom. The reunion with the father is precisely that, a tragic recognition turned into a gentle farewell. The climax, where antagonists and protagonists clash in a storm of technology and emotion, is another event that, at first glance, might seem like spectacle for its own sake. But examined critically, it functions as the externalization of internal struggle. The antagonist's attempt to control time reflects the temptation we all feel to rewrite our pasts, to eliminate mistakes, to perfect our lives by editing out the pain. The protagonist's resistance is not merely about saving the future from tyranny. It is about accepting that life's meaning lies in its imperfections. This event embodies the thematic tension between control and acceptance. In choosing to let go, to destroy the very technology that enabled their journey, the characters embrace the inevitability of time. What makes this climax emotionally resonant is not the explosions or the spectacle, but the family standing together, past, present, and future converging in a single moment. Critically, this is the narrative's culmination of doubling, of reconciliation, of forgiveness. It shows that healing is not the erasure of wounds, but the acknowledgement of them. The final farewell between father and sons is perhaps the most significant event of all. It is quiet, understated, but devastating. This event is not about saving the world. It is about saying goodbye properly. In that goodbye lies the essence of the film's impact. It taps into a universal desire to have one more conversation, one more hug, one more chance to say what was left unsaid. This is where the film transcends its genre trappings and enters the realm of literature. It becomes not just a story about time travel, but a meditation on grief, love, and the impossibility of closure. From a critical perspective, the emotional resonance of this final event is profound. It offers the audience both catharsis and recognition. We cry not because the characters are fictional, but because they enact for us a fantasy we secretly crave. The chance to reconcile with those we've lost. The thematic core, acceptance of impermanence, is painful but necessary. By dramatizing this truth, the film does what art has always done. It gives us a way to feel our own unspoken griefs. Reception of the film, I think, is deeply tied to these events. Critics and audiences alike may debate the mechanics of time travel or the sharpness of its dialogue, but what lingers are the emotional beats. The boy meeting the man speaking to his mother, the reunion with the father, the farewell. These events resonate across cultural boundaries because they touch on universal human experiences: loss, regret, reconciliation, the longing for closure. They are not science fiction problems, they are human problems dressed in science fiction clothing. In the end, the film's impact comes not from how cleverly it explains paradoxes, but from how honestly it explores emotions. Its critical strength lies in its ability to weave spectacle and intimacy, to stage events that thrill the senses while piercing the heart. The thematic resonance, grief carried across time, self-confrontation, the acceptance of imperfection, ensures that its events are not just remembered but felt. And that ultimately is why it matters. The strangest thing, perhaps, is that a story about time travel ends up teaching us something timeless, that we cannot rewrite the past, but we can learn to live with it, to forgive it, and to carry its memory forward. The significant events of the film, the first meeting of selves, the kitchen table conversation, the battles, the reunion, the farewell, all contribute to this singular truth. They remind us critically and emotionally that our stories are not about escaping time, but about living fully within it, and in that recognition lies the film's enduring power. The story of how this film came to life is almost as fascinating as the one told on screen. If the narrative within the movie is about revisiting the past and reconciling with who we were, then the narrative behind the movie is about persistence, collaboration, and the strange, unpredictable ways stories find their way into being. When I think of its production, I don't imagine only cameras and sound stages. I picture late-night brainstorming sessions in dimly lit rooms, costume fittings where fabric is argued over as passionately as dialogue, stunt rehearsals that leave bruises nobody sees, and long stretches of waiting for clouds to move so light falls just right on a character's face. Making a film is always an act of chaos disguised as precision, and in this case, the chaos came with its own odd charms and surprising revelations. The first insight into the production that I find particularly striking is how long this story sat waiting to be told. Before a single frame was shot, the script itself had been drifting through the halls of Hollywood for nearly a decade. Passed from one studio to another, rewritten by various hands, and occasionally shelved altogether, it became one of those lost projects that everyone whispers about but nobody expects to actually see. In a way, that delay became part of the film's DNA. It's ironic, almost poetic. A movie about time itself needed time to mature before it could exist. The final version we see is the product of years of evolution, of ideas discarded and resurrected, of casting possibilities imagined and then abandoned. One fascinating production fact is that before the lead actor we now associate so strongly with the role came aboard, the part had been offered to, and even briefly attached to, several very different performers. Each would have brought their own energy, their own cadence to the story. The idea of one of those alternate actors delivering the film's most tender lines feels like peering into an alternate reality, a what-if timeline as compelling as the film's plot itself. But once the eventual lead signed on, the project shifted. His mixture of charm, sarcasm, and vulnerability became the glue that held the film's tonal shifts together. Crew members have said that after the first week of filming, there was no doubt this was the actor the film had been waiting for all along. Another behind-the-scenes detail that rarely makes its way into press releases, but fascinates me, is the dynamic between the young actor and his older counterpart. Their chemistry was essential. Without it, the film would collapse, because the premise depends entirely on the audience believing they are two versions of the same soul. The production team handled this challenge in an unusual way. Instead of months of line rehearsals, the boy spent his preparation time immersing himself in the older actor's previous work. He memorized his rhythms, the timing of his jokes, the way he paused between words. By the time cameras rolled, he could mimic him with uncanny precision. On set, crew members often laughed that watching the boy speak was like looking at a tiny mirror of the adult. This preparation turned out to be invaluable, giving their scenes together a kind of eerie authenticity. It wasn't just acting, it was a strange mimicry that bordered on the uncanny. The director himself often described the shoot as juggling two very different films. On one hand, there were the high-energy science fiction elements, chase scenes with futuristic drones, combat sequences requiring elaborate choreography, explosions timed down to the millisecond. These required large crews, specialized equipment, safety checks, and long days spent setting up shots that might only last a few seconds on screen. On the other hand, there were the intimate family moments. A son talking to his mother, a boy realizing his own vulnerability, a man finally meeting his father again. These scenes required quiet, patience, and emotional openness. Moving between those extremes day after day created a kind of whiplash for cast and crew alike. One morning might begin with carefully positioning pyrotechnics in a forest, while the afternoon ended with the entire set hushed so two characters could whisper to each other across a kitchen table. The crew joked that they were filming a blockbuster and an indie drama simultaneously. Some of the funnier stories from the set come from these extremes colliding. During one particularly emotional take, where the older character confides something heavy to his younger self, the sound of a drone prop malfunctioning interrupted the silence. The prop's whirring motor, meant to be off, sputtered loudly in the background, breaking the spell. Instead of frustration, the actors burst out laughing, tears of genuine humor replacing the scripted ones. They eventually redid the scene, of course, but the memory of that malfunction became a favorite anecdote retold whenever the cast was interviewed. another unusual challenge was weather. The film makes use of lush outdoor locations, forests, fields, skies streaked with clouds, and while CGI could enhance them, the production wanted as much natural beauty as possible. That meant they were at the mercy of nature. One location was particularly notorious, a forest chosen for its eerie stillness and shafts of natural light. Midway through filming, a freak storm swept through, scattering equipment, drenching costumes, and forcing everyone into makeshift shelters. What could have been a disaster turned into a creative boon. Reviewing the footage later, the director noticed that the early moments of the storm, trees bending, leaves flying, looked hauntingly perfect. He decided to keep them, stitching nature's disruption into the fabric of the film. It became one of those moments where real life accidentally wrote itself into the story. Props, too, became sources of both frustration and amusement. The futuristic staff weapon, central to several action sequences, went through endless redesigns. Early prototypes were too heavy for the actors to wield convincingly, while later versions snapped under the strain of choreography. At one point during a rehearsal, the weapon broke in half mid-swing, sending fragments skittering across the floor. Rather than break character, the actor improvised, incorporating the accident into the fight. The stunt team loved the rawness of it so much that aspects of that improvisation were later written into the choreography. What was supposed to be a polished piece of futuristic tech became memorable partly because of its imperfections. One of my favorite bits of trivia involves the older actor's costume. His weathered leather jacket, which became a visual signature of his character, was not custom-made by the wardrobe department, but discovered in a small vintage store. The costume designer wanted something that looked truly lived in, something no amount of artificial distressing could replicate. When they found the jacket, it was perfect, scuffed, scarred, softened by years of wear. But the strangest detail was discovered later. Tucked inside one pocket was an old receipt from decades earlier. It was yellowed, illegible in places, but clearly real. Rather than remove it, the actor decided to keep it there, treating it like a hidden relic, a piece of history folded into his costume. He later admitted that the receipt became a kind of talisman, a reminder that the jacket had lived a life before him, just as his character had. The audience never sees it, but it gave his performance an extra layer of authenticity. Sound design, though invisible to viewers during production, created its own oddities on set. Because the futuristic gadgets and weapons had not yet been given their signature hums and buzzes, actors were often reacting to silence. Watching them on set, dodging invisible blasts and flinching at sounds that did not yet exist, apparently looked faintly ridiculous. Crew members sometimes had to bite their lips to avoid laughing during takes, but once post-production added the sounds, the scenes suddenly transformed, seamless and believable. It was a reminder that acting often requires an almost childlike imagination, pretending convincingly enough that the illusion holds. Harnesses and stunt rigs also produced unexpected moments. To simulate futuristic combat, actors were often strapped into elaborate rigs that allowed them to flip, fly, or crash with controlled impact. In one rehearsal, the rig malfunctioned, spinning the lead actor upside down in a way that left him dangling helplessly. Instead of frustration, he broke into laughter, shouting jokes while crew members scrambled to right him. The young actor laughed even harder, teasing him mercilessly afterward. That accident, though not on camera, became a bonding moment between cast members, a reminder that even in the midst of high-stakes filmmaking, comedy sneaks in through the cracks. Perhaps the most emotionally strange behind-the-scenes detail comes from how personal the story became for some of the actors. The lead actor, in particular, has spoken about how scenes involving grief and reconciliation echoed his own life experiences with loss. There were moments on set where emotion overwhelmed him, not because of the script itself, but because of memories it stirred. During one take, he asked for a pause, needing space to collect himself before continuing. That vulnerability bled into the performance, giving it a rawness that critics later praised. Behind the polished production, there were real tears, real memories being revisited. The young actor brought his own flavor of strangeness to the production. Curious and relentless, he peppered the crew with endless questions about time travel, paradoxes, and whether any of what they were filming could theoretically happen. Between takes, he even built his own version of the ship out of cardboard and tape, proudly showing it to the crew. They nicknamed it the prototype and kept it in a corner of the set as a mascot. Though it never appeared in the film, it symbolized the kind of childlike wonder that underpinned the whole project. Improvisation also played a bigger role than audiences might realize. Many of the sharpest, funniest exchanges between the boy and the man were not scripted word for word. The director encouraged them to riff, to interrupt each other, to talk over one another like real family members might. Some of the most memorable lines in the finished film were born spontaneously, catching even the crew by surprise. Those improvisations gave the relationship its lived-in quality, as though we were watching real siblings bicker rather than scripted dialogue. Even the villain's portrayal carried behind-the-scenes oddities, because the role required the actress to play two versions of her character, the present and the future. The production used a mixture of body doubles and digital effects. This meant that in some scenes, she was effectively acting opposite herself. Delivering lines to a stand-in who would later be digitally replaced created an eerie energy on set, a kind of uncanny doubling that echoed the film's themes. The actress later admitted it was one of the strangest challenges of her career. It felt like arguing with my own reflection. One final fun fact that has always stuck with me. The project nearly fell apart more than once during pre-production. Funding wavered, schedules conflicted, and for a time it seemed destined to be shelved once again, but the stubbornness of its creative team carried it through. They believed so fiercely in its potential that they kept pushing, rewriting, reassembling, until it finally moved forward. That persistence mirrors the story itself. A narrative about fighting against time's disruptions nearly lost its own battle with time. Looking at all these production insights together, the storms that became cinematic atmosphere, the jacket's forgotten receipt, the improvised jokes, the cardboard spaceship, the laughter from harness mishaps, the tears drawn from real grief, I realize that they are not simply trivia. They are part of the film's soul. A story about memory, family, and imperfection was created in an atmosphere of accidents, improvisations, and strange serendipities. The filmmaking process itself mirrored the film's themes. Messy, unpredictable, but deeply human. That, I think, is what makes the behind-the-scenes story so fascinating. It reminds us that films are not conjured perfectly from imagination. They are built from broken props, sudden storms, laughter at mistakes, objects with forgotten histories in their pockets, and children who ask too many questions. They are human endeavors, fragile and chaotic, stitched together by persistence and love. And in that humanity, in all its strangeness, lies their real magic. What strikes me most when I think back on this film is not only the story or the characters, but the world in which it all unfolds, the places, the textures, the light that saturates each scene. Cinema, after all, is not only about dialogue and action. It is about atmosphere, about the emotional landscapes conjured by setting and shot composition. A story can be tender on the page, but it becomes transformative on screen when a shaft of sunlight falls just so across a grieving mother's face, or when the blue glow of a futuristic machine makes a boy's fear visible without a single word. To me, the settings and cinematic elements of this film act like a second narrative thread, quietly telling their own story underneath the words and actions. The opening, grounded in suburbia, is the perfect starting point for a story obsessed with time and memory. The neighborhood with its picket fences and modest houses might seem unremarkable, yet it is precisely its ordinariness that gives it power. It feels like a place we have all known at some point in our lives. A yard littered with bikes, a kitchen where the hum of appliances masks silence between family members, a bedroom littered with video game controllers and half-finished homework. These small, familiar details anchor us. They remind us that time travel, grief, and reconciliation are not abstractions, but human experiences that begin in the most ordinary of places. The choice of setting says, this story could be yours. The boy's home is itself a character, and the cinematography treats it that way. Notice the way the camera lingers in hallways, where shadows seem to stretch a little longer than they should. The house breathes with emptiness, the absence of the father echoing in corners. The color palette here is muted, soft browns, faded greens, the warm but slightly dim glow of lamps. It is not a bleak house, but it is a house that wears its grief quietly. In a critical sense, this setting situates us emotionally before the plot even takes off. We already feel the boy's loneliness in the walls, the way he darts from room to room as though trying to fill the silence. When the extraordinary intrudes, a ship tearing through the night sky, the effect is heightened precisely because of that grounded setting. The flash of light, the sound of engines ripping through the quiet suburban dark, feels almost sacrilegious. The contrast between the domestic and the otherworldly is cinematic gold. A reminder that wonder often arrives where we least expect it. This is where cinematography shows its craft. The shot compositions tilt from steady, intimate close-ups in the house to wide, destabilizing angles when the ship crashes. The world is literally thrown off balance, and we feel that disorientation alongside the boy. The forest becomes the next crucial setting, a liminal space where much of the action unfolds. Forests in literature and cinema have always been sites of transformation. think of fairy tales, where children wander into woods and emerge changed. Here, the forest is no different. It is at once beautiful and menacing, its tall trees offering cover while also trapping the characters in shadow. Cinematographers often speak of painting with light, and in these forest scenes, you see exactly what they mean. Streaks of sunlight pierce through branches, dappling the ground in shifting mosaics, as though time itself were fractured around them. At night, the forest becomes a different world, fog curling through trunks, the glow of futuristic weapons casting eerie halos. This shifting quality of the forest mirrors the shifting relationship between the boy and the man, moments of safety, moments of threat, all within the same space. Then there are the scenes of flight and pursuit, where futuristic drones and ships dart across skies. Here, the setting widens into landscapes that blend natural beauty with technological menace. Jagged cliffs, endless skies, fields that stretch into the horizon, these are not just backdrops, but canvases against which the character's fragility is painted. When you see a boy and his older self running across a field as a ship looms overhead, you are reminded of scale, small humans caught in the vast machinery of time. Cinematically, this is achieved by low-angle shots that emphasize the enormity of the sky, contrasted with tight close-ups that pull us back into the beating hearts of the characters. The push and pull between macro and micro, the vastness of setting and the intimacy of emotion, is one of the film's most effective cinematic strategies. The schoolyard, though it appears only briefly, is another setting worth noting. Here the boy faces bullies, and though the sequence is small, its impact is large. The setting is familiar to almost everyone, a stretch of pavement, the clang of lockers, the sense of exposure that comes from being young in a space where cruelty can feel magnified. The cinematography captures this vulnerability by shooting from slightly above, making the boy look smaller, more fragile, swallowed by his surroundings. Later, when he stands a little taller, the camera shifts to eye level, subtly signaling his growth. It is a small cinematic choice, but it reinforces the emotional arc. The mother's spaces, her car, her workplace, the kitchen table are all infused with realism. They ground the narrative in her exhaustion. Notice how her car is shot, the rearview mirror reflecting her tired eyes, the camera lingering on her hands gripping the wheel just a little too tightly. These shots tell us what words never need to. She is holding everything together by sheer will. The settings of her life are ordinary, but the way they are filmed makes them heavy with the invisible weight of single parenthood. When the father enters the story, new settings appear. Labs, offices, the sterile spaces of science and innovation. These settings are filmed with colder light, a starker palette, emphasizing both the brilliance and the danger of invention. Glass, steel, and glowing screens dominate these scenes, a stark contrast to the warmth of the home and the organic textures of the forest. Critically, this juxtaposition highlights the thematic tension. Human connection versus technological control, love versus power. The settings themselves embody the film's conflicts. The antagonist's world is another visual marvel. Her headquarters, filled with gleaming architecture and panoramic windows overlooking cityscapes, is designed to impress and intimidate. The cinematography often frames her in high angles, emphasizing dominance, while filling the space with cold light and reflective surfaces. She is surrounded by her empire, but it feels sterile, lifeless, an environment that reflects her hunger for control rather than any true vitality. Compare that to the warmth of the mother's kitchen, cluttered and imperfect but alive, and the film's message becomes clear. Power without love is emptiness. Cinematography plays perhaps its most powerful role in the intimate conversations. The kitchen table scene, where the man speaks tenderly to his mother, is shot with shallow focus. Backgrounds blur into softness, leaving only faces sharp, luminous. This isolates emotion, reminding us that in this moment, nothing else matters. The use of light is equally intentional. A warm lamp glows on the side, casting a halo on her face, as though memory itself is illuminating her. These visual choices transform dialogue into poetry. Color grading is another unsung hero. The film begins with muted tones, soft grays, earthy browns, reflecting grief and ordinariness. As the story introduces time travel and futuristic elements, the palette sharpens. Neon blues, stark silvers, glows that feel almost alien. Yet the most emotional moments often return to warmer, golden hues, suggesting that despite the sci-fi trappings, the heart of the story lies in family, in love, in the ordinary. The oscillation between cool and warm palettes is not accidental. It mirrors the oscillation between spectacle and intimacy. Even the use of sound design, though not visual, works hand in hand with setting. In the forest, silence is punctuated by rustling leaves, emphasizing vulnerability. In the lab, the hum of machines creates unease. In the kitchen, the clink of cutlery grounds us in realism. These details enhance the setting's atmosphere, reminding us that setting is not only seen but felt through all senses. The climactic scenes, where father, son, and older self stand together, use setting as emotional amplification. Wide shots of open fields suggest freedom, possibility, a return to something primal and timeless. The sky, vast and uncontainable, becomes a metaphor for time itself, beyond anyone's control, stretching endlessly. The cinematography lingers here, pulling back from tight close-ups to show the smallness of humans against that expanse. Yet within that smallness lies beauty, three figures standing together, defying inevitability, even for a moment. What fascinates me most is how the settings echo literary traditions. The home, the forest, the lab, the villain's tower, each feels archetypal, like symbols pulled from myth. Homes are places of origin and return. Forests are spaces of testing and transformation. Labs are sites of hubris and danger. Towers are prisons of power. The film taps into these archetypes but cloaks them in modern visuals, allowing us to feel their mythic resonance without losing the immediacy of cinematic realism. Critically, the settings also shape how we as viewers process the story emotionally. Imagine if the film had taken place entirely in sterile labs or futuristic cities. It would have lost its intimacy, its resonance. By grounding the extraordinary in ordinary spaces, kitchens, schoolyards, backyards, it insists that the themes of grief, love, and reconciliation belong not to distant futures, but to us here and now. The settings remind us that the science fiction is a frame, the heart is human. The cinematography's greatest triumph is its ability to balance scale. In one moment, we are zoomed into a boy's trembling lip as he hears his father's voice. In the next, we are pulled back to watch ships streak across the sky. This fluctuation between the micro and the macro mirrors the human experience. Our lives are shaped by both intimate conversations and vast, uncontrollable forces. The film's settings and cinematic elements weave these scales together seamlessly. In the end, the settings linger as much as the characters. The quiet of a bedroom, the chaos of a forest storm, the sterile glow of a lab, the warmth of a cluttered kitchen, each remains etched in memory. They remind us that place matters, that emotion is inseparable from environment, that stories live not only in what is said, but in where it is said. The settings of this film do not merely hold the story, they tell it. And perhaps that is the most important truth, that in cinema, setting is never neutral. It is a language of its own, speaking in light and shadow, in texture and color. In this film, that language whispers grief, shouts wonder, and ultimately sings of love, a song carried not just by characters, but by the spaces they inhabit and the way those spaces are seen. There's a kind of magic that lives not only on the screen, but also in the messy, unpredictable, and often hilarious world behind the camera. When I think about how this film came together, I find myself just as fascinated by the behind-the-scenes stories as by the story that eventually unfolded before audiences. Because what we see, that polished final cut, is really just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it all, there were countless hours of work, laughter, setbacks, and surprising moments that shaped what we eventually experienced as viewers. And the beauty of talking about these behind-the-scenes insights is that they feel like opening a window into a secret diary, intimate, raw, and strangely more human than the final film itself. One of the most charming things I discovered is just how much fun the cast had with each other off-camera. The pairing of a seasoned actor and a younger counterpart, meant to represent different versions of the same person, could have felt forced or even gimmicky if the chemistry wasn't there. But behind the scenes, they bonded almost immediately, turning their differences in age and experience into a kind of playful banter that fed directly into their performances. It's said that the older actor often teased the younger one about his comic timing, jokingly pointing out whenever he thought the kid was stealing the scene. The younger actor, bold and clever, would fire right back with quips of his own. Watching them interact between takes, crew members reportedly found themselves forgetting the cameras entirely. It was like witnessing a real older brother and younger brother dynamic spring to life. That energy which the audience senses on screen was forged in those unscripted, authentic moments between shots. The director, meanwhile, often acted like a kind of gentle referee between the two, encouraging their improvisations, but occasionally reminding them that, yes, at some point they did actually have to shoot the scene. He was known for creating an environment that felt collaborative rather than rigid, giving the actors room to breathe life into their roles. In interviews, he later said that his best ideas often came not from the script, but from watching the cast fool around on set, because those spontaneous bursts of humanity were what truly captured the heart of the story. But fun as it was, filming wasn't without its challenges. One of the biggest hurdles was balancing the practical effects with the heavy reliance on visual effects. For a movie steeped in futuristic tech and time travel, you'd expect everything to be created with green screens and computer magic. Yet the production team was adamant about grounding as much as possible in real, tactile environments. That meant building actual sets for ships, labs, and even entire sections of the forest, where much of the action takes place. It wasn't always glamorous. Imagine actors sweating under hot lights in a ship's cockpit that didn't really fly, or running through a forest where crew members were crouched just out of frame, holding fog machines and lights at odd angles. The effort was exhausting, but it paid off. Actors repeatedly mentioned how much easier it was to lose themselves in the story when they weren't staring at a blank green wall, but at something tangible, something they could touch. One of the funniest behind-the-scenes stories came from the forest sequences. Apparently, during one particularly intense night shoot, with fog rolling in and lights carefully rigged to create just the right atmosphere, a stray raccoon wandered onto the set. Instead of halting production immediately, the crew just froze, waiting to see what would happen. The raccoon, unbothered by the futuristic props or the hushed humans, sauntered straight across the scene, sniffed at one of the glowing weapons, and then trotted off into the dark. The actor's breaking character burst out laughing, and the director had no choice but to call cut. Later, the moment became a kind of running joke. Whenever a scene wasn't working, someone would quip, "Bring back the raccoon." Another unexpected challenge came from working with the younger actor, who, while remarkably talented, was still learning the ropes of professional filmmaking. There were moments when his natural energy and excitement made him prone to improvising a little too much or forgetting a line in his eagerness to jump ahead. Rather than being frustrated, though, the older cast members often turned those slip-ups into moments of encouragement. One actor, in particular, would deliberately flub his own line after the kid missed his, just to even the playing field and remind him that mistakes are part of the process. Those small gestures, invisible to audiences, built a foundation of trust and camaraderie that carried through every scene. The crew, too, had their share of bonding moments. Because so much of the filming took place in challenging outdoor conditions, rain, cold nights, unpredictable weather, the cast and crew often had to find ways to keep spirits high. One evening, after hours of shooting in damp conditions, a group of crew members decided to start a campfire, safely out of sight of the cameras, of course, and roasted marshmallows while they waited for a lighting setup to be adjusted. Soon enough, the actors joined in, huddled around the flames with sticky fingers and laughter echoing through the trees. For a few moments, it was less like a high-budget Hollywood set and more like a group of friends on a camping trip. That sense of community seeped into the film itself, giving the finished product a warmth that can't be faked. The technical side of things brought its own challenges. Time travel sequences, with their glowing portals and intricate choreography, required painstaking coordination between departments. The visual effects team had to map out exactly where effects would appear later, while the cinematographer ensured the actors' eyelines matched those imagined visuals. On more than one occasion, a scene had to be reshot because an actor's gaze didn't quite line up with where a special effect would eventually be added. Patience was essential. Yet, despite the frustration, many cast members spoke about how invigorating it was to learn the mechanics of filmmaking, how a simple dot on a green screen could later become a swirling vortex of light. For them, it was like watching the skeleton of a story gradually dressed in muscle and skin, and then there were the stunts. While much of the action relied on CGI, many sequences were physically demanding. Actors were strapped into harnesses, flung through the air, or asked to sprint endlessly through sets rigged with explosions and collapsing debris. Injuries, surprisingly, were minimal, though bruises were plentiful. One actor joked that he had more shades of purple on his legs than a box of crayons. What stood out, however, was how supportive the stunt coordinators were, always ensuring safety came first, but also cheering on the actors as they conquered fears and pushed their limits. That balance of risk and care created not just exciting action, but also genuine performances, where fear and exhilaration on the actors' faces weren't entirely scripted. Perhaps the most touching behind-the-scenes moments came during the quieter scenes, particularly those involving themes of grief and reconciliation. The director encouraged the cast to draw from their own lives, to bring personal memories into the performance. This led to long, intimate conversations off-camera, where actors shared stories of their own families, their own losses, their own what-ifs. These exchanges built a reservoir of authenticity that poured into the film. It wasn't just acting anymore, it was storytelling rooted in lived experience. For the crew, witnessing those raw, vulnerable moments off camera was just as moving as watching them play out on screen. There were, of course, more light-hearted moments too. Between takes, the cast developed a tradition of quoting lines from other famous time travel films, turning it into a kind of competition to see who could deliver the most obscure reference. It became a game that not only entertained them, but also connected their film to the larger legacy of cinematic storytelling. And in a way, it mirrored the film itself, a dialogue between past and present, memory and imagination. Even with all the fun, the production was constantly racing against the clock. Whether delays, complex setups, and the unpredictability of working with a younger lead meant schedules often shifted. But the producers, rather than tightening the leash, leaned into flexibility. They trusted the director's vision and the crew's professionalism, and that trust paid off. The final product didn't feel rushed. It felt considered, crafted with care, and infused with the authenticity that comes only when people are allowed to work, not just as professionals, but as human beings. Looking back, what makes the behind-the-scenes story so compelling is how human it all feels. We see the final film and think of time machines, glowing weapons, and impossible reunions. But behind the camera, it was raccoons on set, marshmallows around a fire, actors teasing each other, and a director who believed that the best way to tell a story about family was to create one on set. That spirit, I think, is what audiences ultimately respond to, even if they don't know it. Because cinema isn't just about what we see, it's about what we feel. And feelings are born from people working together, stumbling, laughing, supporting, and daring to dream. In the end, the film's behind-the-scenes world feels like a story in its own right, one of resilience, creativity, humor, and heart. And perhaps that's why the final cut resonates so deeply. Because woven into every frame are not just lines and images, but echoes of those off-camera moments, moments where humanity, in all its messy, beautiful imperfection, took center stage. Themes are the invisible architecture of a story. They are what hold everything together, even when audiences may not notice them consciously. Symbolism, in turn, acts as the language through which these themes whisper to us, sometimes subtle, sometimes bold, but always deliberate. In the case of this film, what first appears to be a straightforward sci-fi adventure about time travel and futuristic battles soon reveals itself to be a meditation on memory, loss, healing, and the deep, enduring ties of family. What makes the experience powerful is not just the spectacle, but how the spectacle is used as a mirror for emotional truths we all know too well. The most prominent theme is grief. At its core, this is a story about people struggling to live with the absence of someone they loved. The loss of a father shapes both the boy and the man, though in very different ways. The boy lashes out, angry and sarcastic, unsure how to channel his hurt. The man, years later, has buried his grief under layers of cynicism, using humor as a shield. The journey of both characters is less about defeating enemies and more about learning how to sit with that grief, how to let it coexist with love rather than replace it. What strikes me here is how accurately the story captures the long shadow of loss, how it doesn't vanish with time but changes shape, sometimes hardening us, sometimes softening us. Time travel itself functions as a symbol of grief's paradox. Just as grief makes us wish we could go back, undo what was done, relive moments we've lost, time travel literalizes that impossible desire. Each jump through time is a manifestation of longing, to reconcile with the past, to alter it, to heal what cannot truly be undone. The technology isn't just science fiction spectacle, it is metaphor. Every glowing portal, every leap across eras becomes a visual reminder of our own wishful thinking, that if only we could return, things would be different. Alongside grief stands the theme of identity, expressed through the dual presence of the boy and the man. Here the film does something quietly profound. It externalizes the internal dialogue we all have with our younger and older selves. The boy sees in the man what he might become, bitter, guarded, hardened by life and recoils. The man sees in the boy what he once was, innocent, angry, open, and ridicules it because it hurts too much to acknowledge. Their conversations are not just comic banter. They are symbolic of the way we judge and wrestle with ourselves across time. The film suggests that reconciliation doesn't come from choosing one version over the other, but from accepting both, forgiving both. This theme resonates deeply because who among us hasn't wished we could go back and tell our younger selves something important, or receive forgiveness from the child we once were? Another major theme is parental love, especially the imperfect, messy love between parents and children. The mother embodies resilience, stretched between grief and the demands of raising a child alone. She becomes a quiet symbol of endurance, representing all the overlooked ways love sustains even in silence. The father, when he finally appears, is a different kind of symbol, not of perfection, but of fallibility. He is brilliant, ambitious, but flawed, a reminder that even those we idolize are only human. The story doesn't romanticize him into a faultless savior. Instead, it shows us the power of recognizing a parent's imperfections and still choosing love. This theme underlines one of the story's most moving messages, that family bonds endure not because they are flawless, but because they survive imperfection. Symbolism threads itself throughout the film to reinforce these ideas. The glowing weapons, for example, are not just futuristic gadgets, they serve as extensions of the characters themselves. When wielded by the man, they reflect years of experience, efficiency, and control. When the boy interacts with them, they feel unwieldy, oversized symbols of a future he cannot yet carry. The contrast becomes a metaphor for maturity, for the gap between who we are now and who we must eventually become. The forest setting, recurring throughout the narrative, carries symbolic weight as well. Forests in literature often represent the unknown, the subconscious, the place where one gets lost in order to be transformed. Here, the forest becomes the backdrop for moments of danger and reconciliation alike. It is both hostile and protective, mirroring the internal landscapes of the characters. In its shadows, secrets are revealed. In its open spaces, connections are rebuilt. The forest, then, becomes more than a location. It becomes a symbol of transition, a place between worlds, much like time travel itself. The antagonist embodies another crucial theme: the dangers of control and ambition. She seeks to bend time to her will, to rewrite history for her own gain. Symbolically, she represents the temptation we all feel to control what cannot be controlled. Her coldness and ambition are not alien traits, they are human impulses taken to their extreme. Through her, the film warns against the illusion of mastery over time and destiny. In trying to perfect the past, she loses her humanity. In this way, she becomes a symbolic foil to the family at the heart of the story. Where they learn to accept imperfection and loss, she clings to control, and it destroys her. The behind-the-scenes stories revealed the humanity behind the craft. The friendships formed, the challenges overcome, the laughter that softened grueling days. And the themes, oh, the themes. We lingered over them as one lingers over poetry, noticing how grief, reconciliation, memory, and love wove themselves again and again through dialogue, action, even the spaces between words. We saw how symbolism acted like secret threads, subtle enough to miss yet strong enough to hold the narrative together for those willing to notice. Then, of course, we turned to the voices that completed the circle. The cast in their interviews, bearing bits of themselves as they reflected on their roles, and the audience in their reviews, bringing their own stories to the table. We heard actors speak about what it felt like to confront their younger selves, about bringing personal grief into their roles, about balancing humor with heaviness. We heard audiences admit to crying, to healing, to seeing themselves in this story. The dialogue between cast and viewer reminded us that cinema is never one-directional. It's a conversation, a collaboration between the makers and the watchers, between the screen and the heart. And so here we are at the end of this long journey, where the threads converge. What this film gave us was not just a spectacle, not just a piece of entertainment, but a meditation on what it means to be human. It reminded us that grief doesn't vanish with time, but can soften into understanding. It showed us that reconciliation, though impossible in the literal sense, is always possible in memory, in reflection, in love. It asked us to laugh, even in the face of loss, because laughter and sorrow are siblings that walk hand in hand, and it dared us to consider what we would say if we could speak to our past selves, to our lost loved ones, to the people we miss. For me, the greatest gift of this story was not in its dazzling visuals or clever time travel mechanics. It was in how it made me pause and think of my own life. Of the conversations I wish I could still have, of the loved ones I wish I could sit with for just one more afternoon. That's the measure of a film's true impact, not the numbers it makes at the box office, but the quiet way it slips into your soul and makes you remember, makes you feel. And if you stayed with me through this entire exploration, then I know you feel it too. You're not just watching movies, you're engaging with them, dissecting them, finding in them reflections of literature, philosophy, memory, and humanity itself. That's why I so deeply value this space we've created here together. It's not just a channel, it's a community of thinkers, of dreamers, of literature enthusiasts who crave more than surface-level reviews. You want meaning, depth, resonance, and I feel honored to share that with you. So before we part ways today, let me leave you with a gentle invitation. If you found something here that sparked thought or stirred emotion or simply reminded you why you love movies in the first place, I'd ask you to subscribe. Not as a number, not as a tally, but as a companion on this journey. Like, share, leave your own reflections in the comments, because I genuinely want to hear your voices, your perspectives, your connections. This is not just my exploration, it's ours. And as we close this chapter, know that there will always be more stories waiting, more films that beg to be explored not just with the eyes but with the heart. Thank you truly for walking with me through this one. Until the next time we meet, may the stories you carry remind you that you are never alone in your reflections, that cinema, like literature, is always a conversation, and that